Hey, welcome back to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. So today I am continuing on our reading of Job, and we're on day 24. So just really quickly, 1 year chronological Bible, boom, and then 1 year chronological Bible reading plan. If you don't want to buy the book, boom, you can look for that online. So I just want to move right in to the reading today. And so the reading was uh, we're in Job 19 through 21. So that was our reading for today. So we're kind of smack in the middle of his story of this book. And we're moving through it really quickly. So doing multiple chapters at a time. And one of the things that I'm noticing when I'm reading it is that it's pretty repetitive. It's pretty repetitive, right? So we see Job talking, and then one of his friends is talking, and then Job replies, and one of his friends replies, and Job replies, right? So it's this back and forth. And I feel like in some ways, they're not getting anything accomplished, right? They're sort of, they continue to argue with each other. Job gets frustrated, his friends get frustrated, then Job gets frustrated again, or they go off on slight tangents and then they have to come back. And so I'm seeing all these things, and in a way, I started getting a little frustrated as I'm reading it. I started feeling like it was a little bit redundant. Because I'm not picking out verse by verse by verse by verse, which I think there is a lot of quality to be able to do that. Like, so if you have the time to really sit and study this book, I think it would be awesome, because they have a lot of single verses in here that are very, um, they're really illustrative, right? Like, so we can see pictures in there that you can break apart and figure out what they're trying to say. But when reading it in these chunks, it looks like it's repetitive or redundant. And I listen to podcasts, other ones, and I listen to murder mysteries and Christian podcasts and all kinds of other things. And one of the ones I was just recently listening to over the past couple of days was a traumatic experience. So the author, so to speak, of this podcast had a really traumatic experience, and one of the things that he was saying is in these few months where he was experiencing this traumatic experience, he had to reassess his entire life, his faith, his friends, because he kind of lost all of it. And it's interesting how I'm reading this book, and then this podcast, this particular date happens to pop up, and it is so similar to this. Now, he didn't lose anyone by death, so I want to be very careful that it's slightly different. Nobody died, uh, but he was severed in a bad way from his church, and so he lost his church friends, he lost his work, he lost his pastor, he lost people he prayed with. So all of these things, sort of, he lost all of them. And one of the things that he had noted was it took him months into the beginning of years to work through it. And even now, these things, when something will trigger it, right? Like, we have all these words, something will trigger this memory of what he had, and it'll bring it all back again, right? So it brings all these things back again. And I started to think in my own life, some of the things that when I hear that those things being said, it's super easy for me. Like, one of the things that Job says to his friends is, "It's easy for you being on the other side to be able to judge me in this situation." It would, he said, of course, if I was on the other side, I'd be more compassionate. Uh, so I'm going to say, from an outside perspective looking in, not going through trauma in my life right now, it is easy for me to say they just keep going back and forth. Uh, they're not solving anything. They just kind of keep going at each other. And yet this guy said he kept telling his story over and over and over again. And there's something to be said, not saying right or wrong, just saying there's something to be said about purging your story, right? Whether it's to the same people over and over again, or whether it's to different people, there's something to be said about this recognition that you have been through these things, and it has changed you internally, that there has been a difference in your life, and you feel it, and you're trying to process it. And so it it brought me back to a very literal sense of what I think that Job and his friends are going through. Job is trying to process what happened to him and why. And his friends are doing the same. His friends are trying to process what happened to him and why. They are coming, it seems, to this conclusion that he has been sinful. God is still good. God punishes the wicked, and he has been wicked. And he is coming to this conclusion that God is still good. God punishes the wicked, but oopsie, God got this wrong. He doesn't recognize that I am not wicked. So he keeps sort of discussing over and over again what they both believe these truths are. And so I'm more and more coming to this realization that there is a purging or a lamenting that maybe we need to go through when living through these things. We need to in my generation right now. There's an expression called deconstructing, and a lot of people in my generation are deconstructing their faith. Some are deconstructing and it's building it up stronger, but mostly they're deconstructing and they're just losing their faith. They're deconstructing in order to find out why there is no God. And so, in a way, I want to say there's some health to deconstructing your faith, to understanding why you believe what you believe, how long you've been in this certain set of beliefs, and if that is the correct thing, and figuring out what all that means. And I'm starting to process, I guess, in my own brain. It feels like that this is what Job is doing. Job is working through with these guys, not in a super healthy way, but working through with these guys what it means to follow this God, who this God is, and what this God does. And so it seems like he's really working through a lot of these things. And so that's just the picture and the image that I'm coming to as I'm reading this. And again, it's sort of some of this repetitive nature that's going on. So today, again, I'm on day 24, which is Job 19 through 21. We have been in a place where Job and his friends continue to have a back and forth. And so last person to speak was Bildad. And so when we come into Job 19, when I read it, I notice right away that Job is now back in his replies. So he's replying to what Bildad has said to him. And in verses 2 through 6, he feels like his friends are attacking him. He feels like he's being crushed by his friends' words. His friends are, in essence, saying, you need to assess what you have done. You have been wicked and you have been sinful. And that is why what happened to you happened. And so you need to assess and figure out what that is, and then turn away from it and back to God. And so he's being crushed by this because he's saying, I didn't do anything, right? I was faithfully praying for my family. I did all the things that God wanted me to do. I was blameless in his sight. And so he feels like he's being attacked by his friends, by them continuing to say that he is sinful. And I see in verse 6, it says, one of the things that I don't like that he says, then know that God has wronged me and drawn his net around me. So he's coming to the conclusion that God has done something wrong because he is blameless. And therefore, what's happening to him makes God wrong. I just want to remember that. So when I go through trauma again, which I'm sure that I will, I want to remember that what happens isn't because God is wrong. What happens is for a different purpose. And so I want to remember what that purpose could be. What, not maybe necessarily that he's drawing me to something bigger, but there's something else to it. And it's not that God has wronged you as somebody that loves God. And then 25, so it's funny. So then going into 7:20, he starts to blame, Job starts blaming God for a lot of things. So one of the ones I want to look at is verse 12. He says, his troops advance in force. They build a siege ramp against me and encamp around my tent. So he's saying that God is sort of pushing his armies against Job, building up all these things and pushing his armies and things against Job. And then in verse 19, he says, all my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me. And again, he's blaming God for this. He has lost all of his family, and he is full of sores. Like his whole body is sores from head to toe, all the way down to his feet. It was like he was scraping his feet. So he says that because God made him this way and did these things to him, therefore all his friends detest him. And again, so he keeps like almost a full chapter of him blaming God and saying how God is against him. But then in verse 25, I see that he says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and then in the end, he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, so after he dies, yet in my flesh, I will see God. So he knows that God exists. He knows God redeems, so he believes that there will be a redemption after this. And he knows that he will see God. So there is, in some of his speech, there is a little bit of hope and a recognition of God, the God of the universe, and who he is and what he does do. Um, so I see that there is just a little bit of hope in Job for that. And then I want to just go right on to chapter 20. That's now one of his friends is sort of replying to him again. So he heard everything that he said, and then he replies, and he said, "His troubled thoughts prompt me to answer." So in verse 2 to 3, he's responding back to Job's anger at them, because he says, "I hear a rebuke that dishonors me." So Zophar is upset with the way that Job has responded, and my understanding inspires me to reply. And so if I go back to chapter 19, verses 2 to 3, he says, "10 times now you have reproached me. Shamelessly you attack me." He's talking about his friends. "And if it is true that I have gone astray, if my error remains my concern alone, if indeed you would exalt yourselves above me and use my humiliation against me, then know that God has wronged me and drawn his net around me." So, and then in verse 22, I know he says the same. "Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh?" And so he's thinking that these guys are out to torment him. God's out to torment him. His friends are out to torment him. And obviously he's sad about it. And then Zophar says, that's not what we're doing at all. What we're doing is we are just letting you know that you have done wicked things and that God punishes the wicked. So essentially this entire chapter, verse 4 all the way down through verse 29, he says again all the things that are wicked and then the things that God does. Verse 12, "Though evil is sweet in his mouth and he hides it under his tongue, though he cannot bear to let it go and lets it linger in his mouth, yet his food will turn sour in his stomach. It will become the venom of serpents within him." Verse 20, "Surely he will have no respite from his craving. He cannot save himself by his treasure." So he's saying that God will do all these things to the wicked. So this whole, it's a poetic and a picturesque view of the ways that God will punish the wicked. Let's see. So that's all the way down to verse 29. And then in verse 29, it says, "Such is the fate that God allots the wicked, the heritage appointed for them by God." So what he's saying, the good get good, the wicked get wicked, right? So he's saying that God will do all these things. And I say this because in verse 20, or in chapter 21, verse 1, Job is replying again. So Job has listened to him. He's heard everything he says, and then he's replying again. This, I think, is for me my favorite verse that I've had so far. And he says, "Listen carefully to my words. Let this be the consolation that you give me. Listen to me. I'm speaking to you and you're not listening to me. Bear with me while I speak. And after I have spoken, then you can mock me." Right? Then he says, "Go on to mock me. But after I've spoken, so stop and listen to me." We were, my husband and I were in a study with a couple and talking about the importance of listening, and not in an outside way, because I was talking about some scripture that happens later, some stuff that happens when Jesus comes. And I believe in everyday things, I think we need to stop and listen to the person that's across from us. And it's not like, oh, you're just waiting to say something. Stop and take it all in, especially when they disagree with you. It is so easy to listen when somebody agrees with you. It is so much harder to stop and listen to people when they have a completely different view and perspective than you have. I know I struggle with it all the time because I want someone to say what I believe is right, right? So I hear them, I take it in really quickly, and then I shoot back at them what I believe is right. And it's much harder for me to sit and take the time to listen to everything that they're actually saying, try to find the why behind the what. I hate using some of these expressions because I know they're used a lot, but try and find the why. Like, why do you think that way? Why do you feel that way? Could it be because you're a different gender than I am, right? So there's something different about men and women and how they think and the way they process certain things. Could it be because of the age, right? I'm in my mid to older generation going on here, and my daughter thinks very, very differently than I do. We're not growing up in the exact same generation with the exact same issues, and so we have a lot of different thoughts, and it's hard for me to accept some of her thoughts, to take those in. It's hard for me to listen to that. Sometimes I just get really frustrated, and I try and tell her why and how she's wrong instead of listening, because her generation has some different perspectives and different views, and they've lived slightly differently than we have. They've had different good things and different bad things that have happened to them. And it's the same way. Are we different in the way in which we live? Right? Do I live? I'm more living in the suburbs, and does someone in more of an urban or a city area, do they have a different perspective than me? Right? So anyway, it's a massive draw for me to do exactly what Job has asked to do. Listen first. Let that be my consolation. Just stop and listen to me. And then after I have spoken, right, then you can mock me. But bear with me while I speak, because he has something to say, and we might find out why he has something to say. So verse 7, this is I like this chapter. This is one of my favorite chapters so far. Verse 7, he asks some of these really hard questions that I have heard so many people ask, that I'm sure at so many times in my life I have asked myself. For those of you who know, I didn't become a believer until I was an adult, until I was in my 30s. And so I didn't grow up in the faith. And so a lot of these questions that people have, they may have grown up in the faith and then started to question what it really looks like to follow God, what he really does and what he really doesn't do. And so this question is great. Verse 7, he says, why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? We can all see it around us, right? There is no lack of wicked growing all up around us, doing wicked things and not getting any kind of punishment for it. I'm even going to say, I'm going to throw out a number that I'm not sure, but I remember hearing in, again, another podcast I listened to, the murder rate is extremely high right now, and finding those murderers is actually extremely low. So a lot of people who commit the murders or stealing or any kind of evil deeds, a lot of them can't even be found to be punished. So they're not even getting punished on this earth. So, if I look at this and I go, well, if you say in the chapter before you that this thing all happens to the wicked, I can name a list of people that I think are wicked, and none of this is happening to them. And so this is sort of an age-old question. Why do the wicked live on, growing old and increasing in power? Verse 17. Yet how often is the lamp of the wicked snuffed out? How often does calamity come upon them? The fate God allots in his anger. Verse 19, it is said, God stores up the punishment of the wicked for their children. Let him repay the wicked so that they themselves will experience it. But that's not necessarily, and I'm sure most of you have the same perspective, it's not necessarily what we are always saying. So if I go to verse 23, it says, one person dies in full vigor, completely secure and at ease, well-nourished in body, bones rich with marrow. Another dies in bitterness of soul, never having enjoyed anything good. Side by side, they lie in the dust, and worms cover them both. So the truth is that we all live a life and we all die, right? We are all eaten by worms, covered next to each other, right? Like we're all in a grave somewhere, or cremated or whatever it is. We all are that somewhere. Where's the difference between the wicked and the good? Sometimes good things happen to what we would consider wicked people, and sometimes wicked things happen to what we would consider good people, which I would say we can see in this situation. Going back to chapter 1, I know I keep going back to go forward, but going back to chapter 1, God says that Job is righteous or blameless. And so sometimes bad things happen to what you would consider good people. And so then what do we do with that? Verse 29, so this one I found interesting. It says, verse 29, it says, have you never questioned those who travel? Have you paid no regard to their accounts, that the wicked are spared from the day of calamity, that they are delivered from the day of wrath? What I noticed in this, and I could be right, could be wrong, but what I noticed in this is he calls the wicked the ones who travel. And which leads me to think that he is in a town where everybody believes in God, the God of the Hebrew Bible. So he's living in Uz, and so maybe everyone here, everyone around him is what we would call a believer. And those who are traveling in and out of towns, they're the ones who would be considered, maybe they follow different gods. And so possibly considered wicked. Not 100% sure, but that's what I was gathering when I read this. And then so in verse 34, he says, how can you console me with your nonsense? Nothing is left of your answers but falsehood. So that whole speech that Zophar gave in the last chapter, he said, all falsehood, not true. God is not doing that. That's how Job leaves it for today. Tomorrow, we are going to go into chapter 22. If you like this, this has been a blessing. It has inspired you. You are reading, you are joining in with me. Please subscribe. Please share this. Please like it. And I would love if you would comment, especially in this book. As I've said on multiple recordings, this book is not one of the books that I have studied in depth. And so coming to it at this way, I'm finding really fascinating and interesting, and things keep popping up for me. And like I said, at the end, it could look a little bit different. I spoiler alert, I do know what happens a little bit in the end of this, but I'm not sure of all those details. And so I would love to hear what you guys think when you read this, what it says to you, what verses stick out to you, and what you note about God and Job and his friends. So I will see you next time, and keep reading.